Do you want to learn how to start an e-commerce business step by step, be your own boss, regain control of your time, and build serious wealth? By the end of this video, you'll have learned the method I use to decide what to sell online. This is the first step in bootstrapping your e-commerce business. Welcome to the very first episode of Step by Step, my new video series where I go into deep detail and share everything I know on how to bootstrap an e-commerce business so that you can do the same. My name is Spencer. I'm an e-commerce entrepreneur and I've been bootstrapping and growing e-com companies for the past decade. I co-founded Solo Stove, one of the fastest growing branded direct-to-consumer companies out there. We started Solo Stove with $15,000 and bootstrapped it into a 9-figure company. No loans, no VC money, no investors. After a hugely successful exit from that business, and after a lot of soul searching and figuring out what I should do next, I've realized that I get a lot of fulfillment out of helping others succeed. Now that I have the privilege of spending 100% of my time doing anything I want, I've decided to spend a good chunk of that time helping others, specifically e-commerce entrepreneurs just like you. Because I was you, the underdog. No experience in e-commerce, no money, no business background, and no real idea of how I was gonna succeed. But through a lot of luck, mixed with a lot of hard work, I was able to figure it out. So I know you can too. And I'm gonna share everything I know because I wanna see more underdogs win. I wanna be totally transparent and honest with you. I have absolutely nothing to sell you. There are no courses to buy. There are no paid mastermind groups to join. I don't make any money doing this. I do it because 1, it feels good to help others. 2, I hope that through my YouTube channel, I'll have the chance to connect with great people and build real and meaningful relationships. And 3, I want to continue to challenge myself to learn and do new things. And this YouTube channel helps me check that box. I've never put myself out there and created content like this before. It feels like I'm back at ground zero building something. It feels scary and refreshing at the same time. Starting a business has changed my life in a lot of ways, far beyond the financial gains, and I believe it can do the same for you. I can't guarantee your journey in business will end up with a fairy tale story ending, but I can guarantee you that I'll do my best to share all my experience and knowledge with you. With some luck and a lot of hard work, I'm optimistic that you'll have a positive and meaningful experience bootstrapping an e-commerce business. Remember to click that subscribe button so you don't miss my weekly videos, including each new episode of Step by Step. A quick note before we dive into it, since these episodes are a little longer than normal videos, feel free to use the timestamps I put in the descriptions down below to hop around. Also, if you feel like I'm talking too slow for you, use the settings button in the video to increase the playback speed if that helps you save some time. Now let's get right into this episode. One of the first, if not the very first steps I take when starting an e-commerce business is to brainstorm and think through what product I'm selling. I'm guessing you might have already wrestled with this question for some time. It's a tough one. Don't worry about registering a company or learning about Facebook ads at this point. Focus on this one thing: eat, drink, sleep, product ideation, and just stay focused. I've structured this video to do the following. I'm going to first talk about private labeling and its pros and cons. Then I'll talk about what I call unique products. I'll go over the pros and cons of those as well. After these 2 sections, I'll dive into the details of what I call a product checklist. These are specific areas of concern that I think through when evaluating the product I'm considering selling. And just to be clear, we're not talking about where or how we're gonna sell. We're just talking about what you're gonna sell. So if you're thinking of selling on Amazon or on your own website or anywhere else, no problem. We'll address the where question in a future episode. Today is all about brainstorming. So let's start with private labeling. This is quite a common term in the e-commerce world, especially among marketplace sellers like people selling on Amazon or eBay or Etsy or so on. When people say private label, what they're referring to is taking a product that already exists and then slapping their logo or label on it and then calling it their own. People who private label don't invent or create new products, but they may have made slight adjustments to the product, like maybe the color, or maybe they added a bag onto the item, or perhaps changed up the packaging to look different. So slight adjustments, just not big ones. I'm sure you've seen some of these products on Amazon, just multiple products that all look the same. This is essentially what private labeling is. So let's talk about the pros and cons of private labeling. I'll start with the pros, which ironically are also some of the cons as well, but we'll just start. So the first one is that private labeling has a really low bar to entry. Anyone can do it with relative ease. It's a pretty simple exercise of contacting a supplier, asking them what they have, then negotiating price and making whatever small tweaks, if any, you want done to the product. So if you're looking for easy, private labeling definitely checks the box. Number 2, there are usually lower minimum order quantities, or MOQs, on private labeled products. When you order from a supplier, they usually sell in bulk, right? Suppliers, whether they're overseas or domestic, they generally have much lower margins than retailers, so they manufacture in bulk and then sell in large amounts with those lower margins, and that's just generally how those businesses run. So the reason you're able to enjoy lower MOQs with a private labeled product is that you're not the only one buying this product, right? The fact that it's private labeled means there's others buying it too, and the collective amount of orders is large enough, which allows the manufacturer to sell to many customers in smaller quantities. So not having to order a large amount of product, especially when starting, can be a good thing, right? It's less risky. So funny story, for the past year, I spent about 100 hours volunteering through score.org, which is a small business mentoring nonprofit. I met a lady there selling products who custom made placemats for kids, the kind that you put on the table when your kids eat. Anyway, she made them with cute educational content on them, like geography and math. Well, her math mats had mistakes on them, and the math problems printed, they weren't correct. And the problem she dealt with was what to do with this large batch of wrongly printed mats. So in this example, you can see having a low order quantity at the beginning can be helpful and potentially help you avoid costly mistakes. 3, the product is probably easily understood. The fact that it's already out there probably means there's a market for it. Not always, but it's not like you invented something super novel where you have to explain what it does. So since the factory is already making these in large quantities, means it's just not super novel, right? This is good in that you're not worried if there's a market for it. Now, the market could be very saturated and you're going to be swimming in a bloodbath of competition, but at least you know there's a market, which is a good thing. So number 4 is speed. A private labeled product takes relatively less time than creating a totally new and unique product. So you can jump right into selling quite fast, especially if you're thinking of selling on Amazon or other marketplaces. Sometimes speed is important. Maybe you have to make this work quickly, or you have other external factors that you're considering where speed is desired. I know some people, if the margins are there, they air freight over their orders and they're selling in a matter of weeks instead of waiting on a boat and waiting for months before being able to start to sell. So speed can be helpful. This brings me to the last pro on my list here, which is possibly being able to help you generate cash quickly. This kind of ties in with speed, but I've had this happen and benefited from selling something quickly, which generated a lot of cash and profits. Then I was able to take those profits and then either start something new or grow the business in a different way, like taking cash from a private label product and investing into developing a new product from scratch, or pivoting to a new business, and so on. We did this in the early days. A lot of private label products funded some of our other ventures where we needed to develop and grow things kind of from the ground up. So having cash to grow can be extremely helpful, especially when you're bootstrapping. Now for the cons, and I feel like there are lots. So that said, I personally have sold private labeled products, like a lot, like millions of dollars worth of private labeled products. So keep an open mind here as I go through the cons. 1, usually private labeled products have a short lifespan. And this happens because there's a point where there's just so many people selling the exact same thing. And a couple things happen here. First, the competition is so fierce that it becomes impossible to find traffic to sell your product. Or 2, with all the competition, your product becomes a commodity and everyone just starts dropping the price because there's not a lot of ways to sell more other than to lower the price. And this becomes a race to the bottom, and you eventually have to take that product and take it behind the barn and shoot it. And by the way, if you're selling on Amazon, this is what Amazon loves. They love competition, which lowers the price, and that lower price brings in more buyers. More buyers brings in more sellers who then keep competing and then commoditizing products and dropping prices. So remember this if you're selling on Amazon. I'll save Amazon selling for a whole nother video. Con number 2, it's hard to come up with marketing ideas. If the product is already being sold, it's hard to talk about anything interesting. Everything has usually been said about the product, so it just ends up being everyone copying each other. When it comes to building your own website and trying to put together content marketing ideas, it can be very challenging. And one way to think of it is that private labeled products are often commodity items. Think of how hard it is to talk about like an ice cream scooper with customers, right? They know what it does, they know what it is, and it's not anything new or novel. So if it's not, it can be tough to kind of come up with marketing ideas and content. Number 3, if anyone can do it, they will, and most likely a bunch of people are probably already doing it. So you have to be ready for some really fierce competition. If you want to read a good book about not having to fight against competition, read the book called The Blue Ocean Strategy. Highly recommend it. Number 4, going along with fierce competition, you really have to be creative to stand out. You have to be super creative and good at branding, or else you're going to just look like everyone else. So that can be challenging if you're not very creative. So be self-aware. Don't believe you're creative just because your mom or your friends say so. It can be challenging for most of us. Number 5, it's challenging to build inventory. If you know your private labeled product has a short life cycle, but you don't know when it'll end, it's hard to commit to bring in a lot of inventory. And if you run real lean, then you run the risk of running out during peak season, or the opposite. When you start having problems selling the item, if you're stuck with a ton of it, that's no fun either. When you bootstrap a company, a lot of your net worth gets tied up in that inventory. And if your inventory is old and you can't move it, that's super frustrating and can be devastating for your company. Okay, those are the pros and cons. Like I said, I've sold private labeled products, but I do have to say that when I did it in the early days of Amazon. I started selling on Amazon in like 2010, like way early. And there was way less competition and it wasn't nearly as saturated as it is now. I'm not saying not to. Just be aware of what it is and what it isn't. And this is why I'd caution people to not solely rely on apps that are heavily marketed like Jungle Scout, which try to help you guess at how much of some item sells on Amazon. If you're just trying to ride the tailwinds of a private labeled item, it's pretty risky in my mind. But I think the riskier consequence is that you're building habits of following someone else instead of trying to be creative and lead. And I do believe that everyone is creative to some degree. Quite a few products that we made at Solo Stove, we did by having cut and paste sessions. You remember when you were a kid at school and did cut and paste? Well, we just did that. We got lots of cardboard and paper and just started taping and gluing things together. And I don't have an engineering or design background. I studied liberal arts and language. So there you go. I've set the bar really low for you. Okay, let's transition to the opposite of private label and talk about unique products. And unique products are products that are different. Usually, if your product is different enough, no manufacturer is currently making it, right? If you take your design and your ideas to the factory, then you start to work with them to try to figure out how to make it, what it'll cost, how much you'll need to order, and so on. And that's kind of how I loosely define a unique product. Just think of it on the opposite end of the spectrum from private label, where you're selling an ice cream scooper and you just slap your brand name on it. So let's talk about the pros of unique products. So 1, a better mousetrap is just that. It's better. It works better because there's significant improvement on the product. If it works better, there's a good chance that people will want it versus the alternative, right? Have you ever watched, there's a guy on YouTube who just reviews mouse traps. It's pretty funny and entertaining, but it's a cool channel and it illustrates this point, right? If something works better, people are just interested. 2, if it's unique enough and the improvements you made on a product are significant, there's a possibility that you can apply for patents. And this adds a layer of protection against copycats. So number 3, something new gives you a story to tell. You'll have lots of opportunities to talk about your product in marketing materials, on your website, in videos. It can be the difference between not having much to say and having a meaningful dialogue and conversation with your customers over a long period of time. Number 4, unique products can demand high price and in turn have higher margins. And I can't stress how important this is. I think if there's one takeaway in this whole video, this is it. And explaining why it's so important, that's a whole nother video, so I won't go into too much detail. But being able to have a high price point and high margins, it solves so many problems, from giving you more money to acquire new customers, to being able to bankroll inventory on your own without taking on debt, to being able to reach profitability without having to grow a huge company, and so on. So high price point, high margins, so good for your business and so important. 5, Having something different creates a moat around your business. It's harder for competitors to copy. I found that people starting a company tend to take the path of least resistance. So if there's an option that is easier, chances are they'll take it. If you took the harder route to create and develop a unique product, you're less likely to face as much competition compared to if you went the private label route. It's not a guarantee, but you do have to learn to play your odds sometimes. Number 6, you'll get into the habit of forcing yourself to be creative. And this is hard and takes practice, but the more you exercise the creative side of your brain, the better you're going to get. I think of the habit of trying to come up with creative solutions is much better than developing a habit of trying to copy what everyone else is doing. When you're leading instead of following, I think this goes a long way. Last one here, 7, you generally have a longer runway to build and grow your brand story. Brand is a big deal, and this one too needs to be its own video. But think of it this way. You know how I said private label products have a short lifespan? Well, this can be the opposite for unique products that you develop. Since you're not up against tons of competition, you have time to build your customer base and develop your brand story. And as your brand story comes together over the years, it gives your product added value beyond the function of what it actually does, right? Branding takes time, and anything you can do to get more time is totally worth considering doing. I believe having a unique and different product, it just gives you more time. Okay, let's touch on some of the cons real quick, and then we'll dive into the checklist portion, which I think is going to be super valuable for you and give you a ton of useful ideas. So the first con of a unique product, it can be more expensive to develop. It may require engineering drawings to be made, or maybe you have to pay an industrial designer to help you kind of create your vision. It's expensive to manufacture if your product requires special tooling to be made. So think of big metal dies that bend, twist, and shape metal, or plastic molds, or all sorts of things that can get expensive. So 2, you'll probably have higher MOQs. So there's a bigger upfront commitment, and we kind of talked about MOQs earlier on. 3, it takes time to develop your product. Let's just say you already know what you want. Even at that point, it's probably going to take about 6 to 12 months to get it made and then eventually shipped to you. So number 4, quality issues. Quality issues are just more prevalent in the early stages for unique products. Manufacturing something new, it takes time to work out the kinks, and that happens at the beginning. So things can go wrong, and they often do, and that usually happens early on. 5, there's less of a certainty that your product has a market fit, meaning since it's new and different, it's not guaranteed that people want it. And you may have had friends and family tell you it's a great idea, but remember, they're biased. It's a bigger gamble when you do a new and unique product. So 6, you might need to educate your customers if the product is really different and novel. And this takes time and often money. If people don't know what it is or how it even works, this can be really challenging. Okay, so there you have the difference between private label products and unique products. Both have pros and cons, and that's what I really wanted to show you. There's no absolute right way or which way you should go. I've done both. I've done both and done well on both sides of unique and private label, and for various reasons. I've also had massive challenges with both private label and unique products. So consider both and consider your strengths and, more importantly, your weaknesses as you think through these two sides of the spectrum. Maybe one seems harder, but exploit your strengths. Or maybe you start with private label and then hope to transition to unique products, or vice versa. So this is where you choose your own adventure, and I don't think you can go right or wrong. Before I get to the product checklist, I did want to share with you a really cool concept that everything is a remix. I didn't coin the phrase. I borrowed it from Kirby Ferguson. He gave a TED Talk and talked about how everything is a remix. He talks about how hip hop, art, and movies seem new and novel, but actually borrow a lot from the past. And if you have time, watch that video and think about brainstorming unique products, because unique products don't require you to invent something that doesn't already exist. You can instead focus on remixing and borrowing from different products to make something new. Think about cars, right? They all get us from point A to point B, but they're all different too. Tesla cars seem like an amazing new invention, but if you think about it, it's just a regular car, but instead of a combustion engine it uses electricity. Or think of Lululemon yoga clothes. They're just clothes that cover your body, except a little bit more stretchy, which adds comfort. So improvements can be made in a lot of areas for products, and that includes style, function, brand, price, business model, and so on. There's a lot of ways to make something different. Just let your creative juices run wild. And if you want to throw around any ideas with me, feel free to do so in the chat section below, and I'll be sure to reply and chime in and give you my 2 cents. Okay, you've made it to the checklist portion of the video, and this is where I throw out a lot of areas I usually think about when vetting a product, whether it's private label or a unique product I'm developing. And since we're focusing on e-commerce, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are done with the lens of how good a product is for an e-commerce business. So this is part of the video where I explain how I choose a product. And I get asked this question probably more than any, is how do I know what to sell and how do I choose whether or not something's good for e-commerce? And this is it. This is kind of how I do it. So trust me here, I've done this a lot, and this list that I'm going to share with you gets you 80 to 90% of the way in terms of the considerations you should make. So the first one is how many sizes and SKUs and colors you're going to have. So we're talking about product variation and variety here, because when it comes to offering a large SKU count of products, meaning lots of different products, that can become pretty complicated. There's usually like an 80-20 rule when it comes to variations and varieties of products. So think about colors or sizes, right? 80% of your sales are going to come from 20% of those sizes and probably 20% of those colors as well. So I tend to try to stay on the side of less SKUs and less product variations to start with, at least. You can add more SKUs on later, but it just complicates things really early on. It complicates your cash flow, right? How do you spend your money? Do you order a bunch of different products and sizes at the beginning and just have a little bit of each, not knowing what's going to be the best seller? Or do you focus all your energy on bringing in 1, 2, or maybe 3 products, but bringing in more of that, right? So that you can sell and move through that inventory. And if you think about cash flow needs, having to order the next batch of product, if you haven't sold much of it, you're going to have to come up with more cash. But if you have less SKUs and you're moving through that SKU pretty well, you've probably generated enough cash flow to then purchase your next order. So it's easier when you have less SKUs. All right, the next one is seasonality. Is your product seasonal? And this needs to be weighed out, right? It's probably ideal if you're not seasonal and if you kind of have equal sales throughout the year, but it's generally not the case. So you have to look at the seasonality and see how strong that seasonality is. Are you selling Halloween products where you really only get maybe a month out of the year to sell? Or are you selling something that can be sold in the spring and then in the summer and then as a great Christmas product in the fourth quarter? So seasonality is definitely one to consider as well. The next one is shelf life. What is the shelf life of your product? Does it have a shelf life, right? Does it have an expiration date, and will the product go bad within a period of time? Something to consider about. I generally don't like to have products that have shelf lives, but there could be instances where that is an advantage, where you're able to kind of understand how to move product through an expiration date. But something to think about, is there a shelf life on the product? Okay, the next one is, what is the price point? This is something that I spend a lot of time and energy thinking about when I think through a product. For me, I kind of mentioned it before, the higher the price point for me is generally better. I like a higher price point product, high margin as well, right? Having a higher price point product generally allows you and gives you the opportunity to have a higher margin, not only in percentages, but in dollars. And if you have a higher price point product with high margins, you can get by with low volume. You don't have to sell a ton. And in that respect, you're able to serve your customer better and able to give them more attention, often less hassle, especially for bootstrappers, compared to the opposite end of this spectrum, which could be like the Walmart model, right? Really cheap items, a lot of them, you got to sell a ton of volume to make it up. And when you're bootstrapping a company and you're a one-man show or you have a small team, having less burden on the operational side can play to your benefit. All right, the next one is, how shareable is the product? And this kind of leads into word of mouth and social media, and how likely are people going to want to talk about your product. And I can give you an example here where in the past I sold mattresses, memory foam mattresses compressed in a box. These are great products and people love them, but it's very rare that they're out there talking every day saying, hey, you got to come over and lay on my bed and check out my mattress. I mean, some might, but not a ton, right? And how many times do you have a friend come over and lay on your bed? It's got your sheets on. It's kind of weird. And so sharing a mattress and being an advocate of a mattress is tougher than something like Solo Stove, where we made backyard fire pits and camping stoves, and it was a very experiential product where people are using it and generally using it with other people. And that kind of creates a conversation and leads to people sharing it by word of mouth, posting it on social media, etc. So how shareable is the product? That's something to consider about. Okay, the next one is, do you have experience using this product or do you have no experience? And this is important because you might think, hey, here's a great product, here's a great idea, but you don't really know how that product works, or you have no idea the technology or the inner workings of it, which is difficult because it's hard to talk about something and it's hard to get excited about something if you don't really know how the thing works. And so I had a unique experience with this early on when we were selling gardening products. We tried to even out the seasonality by looking at items we could sell indoors or during the winter months of the year. And we kind of stumbled upon people using LED grow lights to grow indoors. And we said, hey, we never heard of this. This is cool. It seems like that could be really useful. Well, we dove into it only to find out that really at that time, people were just using grow lights to grow weed. And that wasn't something we wanted to be a part of. And that was just our ignorance and not understanding or having any experience in that product. So consider whether or not you have experience in the product that you're vetting. Okay, the next one is whether or not your product that you're thinking about is a one-time purchase, or can there be repeat orders? Obviously, repeat orders are highly desirable and helps with the cost of customer acquisition, right? Because you can, over the lifetime of the customer, you can increase the value that they bring you. But if it's a one-time purchase, they kind of buy something, they're done. They probably don't want to come back. Think of it like a mattress. People don't buy mattresses like every other month. They buy one and sleep on it for years. The next question is it fragile? This is pretty self-explanatory, but thinking through e-commerce, you're going to be picking and packing and shipping product to them. And if it's fragile, if it's glass, if it's really thin glass, or if it's fragile electronic components, that's going to be a challenge. So thinking through whether or not it's fragile, that of course is a good one. The next one is it trendy? For me, I don't like trendy products because trends come and they go. So think about like the days of fidget spinners. Those were a hot item for a while, and I'm sure people made a lot of money selling them. But after that phase came and left, anybody selling a fidget spinner really probably isn't doing well right now. So I'd consider whether or not it's trendy and stay away from really short trendy products. A good tool for this is Google Trends. You can hop on there and play around and see kind of year over year how a product trends. And if there's, a flat line and then a huge spike and then a flat line, that kind of tells you that it was a one-time thing. But if you see a good trend line kind of moving up over the years, then that might be something that's a little bit more stable. All right, hang in there with me. Here's the next one. How much tech is involved in your product? And remember, tech becomes obsolete very quickly. So in this day and age of all the tech devices that we have, we know that what you're selling today, if it's technology, will be obsolete in a couple years. So be mindful of that. I personally don't love tech. Just because it's challenging in that respect, where things can become obsolete very quickly. Think about the days of like MP3 players, for those of you who are old enough to remember, right? Those don't exist anymore. Even point and shoot cameras, right? Everything has transitioned to phones. So a challenge for sure if it's based off of technology. All right, the next one is, what are the after sales service demands? So this is important because you need to think a little bit further than you normally would. After you sell the product, are you going to have this increasing pool of customers who are very needy, who need to understand how to install the product or how to use the product? Or is there something with your business or product that leads to a lot of requirements for after sales service. That's something to think through. All right, this next one's pretty easy. What's the size of the box? Remember, you need to ship and store these products. And if you're bootstrapping an e-commerce business, which I did, you're pretty much looking at the space you have in your home as a starting point, right? So you need to warehouse this product. You need to put it in your garage or put it in an empty room. So thinking through the size of the box and the size of the product is something that you definitely want to consider. All right, next one is, what are the liabilities? And this is an interesting one because a lot of the cool toys out there also come with liabilities. So if you're dealing with kids' toys, or remember hoverboards on Amazon, there was a big fiasco about those catching on fire, or food even, right? Things that people consume. What are the liabilities? How risky is it? Are you going to get into trouble if you don't know what you're doing? Liabilities can require that you have product liability insurance at a high amount, so that can get very costly. So just think through what are the liabilities and think through what you want to, and think about the risks you're willing to take. All right, the next one is, do you have passion for the product and can you relate to the target audience? Super important, a little bit cliche to say, but having passion for your product is important. I wouldn't say it's absolutely necessary, but it does go a long way. And if you are choosing between doing two different products or developing or private labeling, if everything else is equal, obviously pick the one that you're more passionate about. Because you're most likely to relate to that audience, and seeing as you're going to be talking with that target audience quite a bit, it shows, it comes across, your passion will come across. Okay, the next one is, are there opportunities to grow the product line? Is it just a one-hit wonder product and that's it? Or can you think a little bit further and say, are there accessories I can add on to this product to increase the product line? Or are there adjacent products that would make sense in being able to sell more and new different products to my customers in the future? So being able to upsell products increases the average order value of your customers. It increases the lifetime value of your customers and just provides them with more value and keeps them coming back to you. So thinking about those opportunities and whether or not you can grow a product line around what you're thinking about, even if it's just a starting point, is something that I would recommend you do. Okay, can you apply for patents? That's the next question. And of course, patents are good. And if you have the opportunity to patent something, whether it's a utility patent or even a design patent, all of those are great to have on your products. Right, the next one is, how difficult will it be to return your products and how difficult will that return process be? So think through the whole selling cycle of selling something, but then somebody not wanting it and wanting to return it, and what does that look like? Because if you're selling large furniture and thinking this is great, this is easy, you might think again, right? When they need to return that product because it's cracked or damaged, what are you going to do with it, and where are you going to store it, and who's going to handle it? So thinking through that return process is pretty important before you even start selling a product. So the next one is, are the products regulated items like guns? So this is something that's I've seen happen where somebody has chosen to sell something that's somewhat regulated, and that can cause a lot of problems because a lot of these platforms where you want to advertise on, all the social media platforms, they all have restrictions on what you can and can't advertise. And if you're selling gun parts or something of that nature, you might just look into it a little bit more carefully, seeing if you're kind of cornering yourself into this dark space in the internet where you're not able to advertise on the major platforms. So think through that. Okay, the next one is, does your product have electronic components that are sensitive and easily damaged? I personally don't like dealing with electronics, right? I think they can break easy and they can be damaged easy and hard to repair. I don't know how to do electronics in terms of repairing them. So I try to stay away from electronic components, and the fact that they can melt and burn and overheat and all that stuff, I just don't understand that, so I tend to stay away from it. So something to think about, are you going into something that has electronic components? Okay, next one is, can you create content and marketing around the product that you're thinking about? And this is important because if you don't have much to say, it's hard to do your marketing online, right? So think about outdoor camping gear products that we've done in the past. there's a lot to talk about. Everything about camping and being outdoors and nature versus if you sell something like steel pipe fittings, right? If you're just talking about something that is very functional and people need, but there's not much to really talk about when it comes to like a steel pipe. That's something to think about because you want to put yourself in a place where you have the opportunity to start communicating and interacting with your customers. And that requires you making content and marketing, and there needs to be things to talk about. So something to think about there. All right, the next one is, does it require certifications to sell? Like UPC or mattresses require an FR code for fire retardancy. Electronics require UL certification. So some of the products that you're thinking about, if it requires certifications, that might be a tough one, which can be good or can be bad, especially if your day job is you do certifications for UL. I mean, that might be your strength and you might play to it, but for the most part, guys like me, we try to stay away from some of those things. Some of them are easier than others, but they can be painful, especially when you're starting. All right, the next one is, where is the supplier located? This is one to just think about. I think there's pros and cons just depending on your situation. If it's overseas in China or in Asia or wherever, India, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, all these places, right? They come with their own set of challenges and they also are good in some ways. Versus made in the USA. I mean, there's opportunities, I think a lot of opportunities for made in the USA products, and that puts your supplier closer to you. There's less of a communication gap between you, and culturally you're pretty much in sync. So different pros and cons for both of them, but I definitely think through this. Okay, last one here is, what is the market size? And this is an interesting topic, right? Just thinking through, is it a huge market with a ton of players? Maybe it's a huge market with no players. Maybe it's a small market with tons of players, or maybe it's a small market with very few players. I think there's different reasons to go into different market sizes, just depending on what your goals are and what your kind of appetite for risk is and challenge. One tool, obviously, to use, I mentioned before, is Google Trends. You can kind of size up different markets by plugging in product A, whether it's fishing lures, and then another product, which might be soccer balls. And you can kind of see from a internet perspective, from search results, how big the market size is. So this is a good way to kind of think through and compare different market sizes. So these are the questions I ask when I'm deciding on what product to sell. The questions are meant to open up more questions and start to get you thinking about all the areas you need to consider. This isn't a graded test, or there's no right or wrong answer. As you work through these questions, and feel free to add to the list however you want, you'll be faced with decisions, or as I call them, business decisions, right? There's no right or wrong answer. It's whatever you want to do. The goal with this list is to get you to make a more informed business decision. And before your head explodes, let me help you simplify the process a little, or at least try to help you know how to answer and approach these questions. So first, there is no such thing as a perfect product. You'll never find something that checks all the boxes in a perfect way. It just doesn't exist. But what it will help you do is pick your poison. And that sounds grim, but what I'm trying to do is help you understand that any product you decide to sell will come with pros and cons. And the more you know about the pros and cons, the more prepared you'll be to deal with them. Think about your strengths and weaknesses, or your unique advantages, and lean into the products that allow you to use your skills and knowledge to solve whatever problems you know you'll likely face. So taking risks is good, but taking calculated risks is better. 2, you have to start somewhere, and where you start is probably not where you'll end up. I started selling mattresses, then that led to RV faucets, and then gardening products, and then gardening fountains, and then more RV accessories, and then mattresses again, and then fireplace heaters, then camping stoves, then camping equipment, and then fire pits. It's crazy how it evolves, but you have to start somewhere, and that's the important part. Number 3, the harder the path you choose, the harder it will be for someone to copy you. I found that the more challenging it is to get a product going, the better it is for the longevity of the business. I got to the point where we wanted everything to be hard because it meant it was safer for the business. Now, there's a fine line between difficult and impossible. So be aware that at the end of the day, you do need to make progress. So find a sweet spot. Lastly, be different. Your product and business needs to be different. Whatever product you decide to start selling, make it as different as possible. Of course, I mean different in a good way. You want to enhance your product, right? Challenge your creativity and push your limits. And I'll give you a bonus tip to get you thinking. If you're stuck for new ideas and inspiration, look to other countries and cultures. There are often a lot of products in other areas of the world that can give you really cool ideas. This has been a little secret that I've kept to myself, but I hope it helps you. That's it. This is how I brainstorm and decide what product to sell. There's no silver bullet, just a lot of hard work and thinking. I could probably make a dozen videos talking about each individual checklist item, but I think this framework gets you started. And if you have any questions or want to go deeper on any point, let me know in the comments below and I'll be sure to address it. Congrats on making it to the end. Now you know how to brainstorm a product to sell online. Now go do the work, write things down, stay focused, don't get distracted. Eat, drink, sleep product ideas until you find yours. Because if you don't have anything to sell, nothing else really matters. Be patient. It'll come. Reach out to me below if you have any questions or comments. I'll be sure to answer all of them. If this video was helpful, do me a huge favor and click the like button so this video gets shared. And remember to subscribe too and ring that bell for notifications so you don't miss the next episode. Until then, good luck, work hard, and I'll see you on the next episode of Step by Step.